Do you have something important to do next week? Well, here are the best times and dates to do so, according to traditional electional astrology. Electional astrology is the practice of choosing specific hours and dates to do something important when the planets and the signs are in a positive configuration aligned with what you are doing, based on the principle that the alignment of the planets in the sky reflects how things are going on Earth, and therefore by selecting a good celestial alignment, it suggests or portends that what we're doing here on Earth will go similarly well. Alright, so let's talk about the general astrological weather of next week. The first thing that will happen around Tuesday is that Mars, which has recently ingressed into Taurus, will come up to an exact square with Pluto in Aquarius. Mars can cause violence, attacks, explosions, severances, burning, and so on. And Pluto can take things to extremes or make things extremely large or extremely small. And so there have been instances, for example, in mundane astrology in the world previously of big explosions, dangerous and harmful explosions happening on aspects such as these. And so that's something we definitely want to de-emphasize in our charts around this time. And then in terms of relationships, things might feel more cool and restricted and depressing because Venus, which is in the sign of Cancer now, will form an exact square with the planet Saturn in Aries around Thursday, the 28th of May. And so that's something we also don't want to be highlighting Venus or Saturn in our charts either. And for a couple of days, the moon will also be in Scorpio, where it's in its fall. And when the moon, which is so important in our electional charts, it's what brings the election down to earth and makes it manifest and real in the physical plane. And when its dignity is compromised by being in detriment or fall, the moon can struggle to manifest things. So we want to avoid the dates when it's in Scorpio. In terms of the positive things that we really want to highlight is that Mercury in its domicile of Gemini is in lovely position this week. It's moving out from under the sun's beams and becoming visible. It's in its own sign, and it's also cleared some more challenging aspects that it faced earlier when it was conjunct Uranus, square the bendings, which made it feel very stuck, and so on. So we really, because Mercury moves so fast, it's basically going to be gone by the week after this. So this is our time to highlight and make use of that Mercury in Gemini. And then, although Venus's position isn't great, it is nice for us to have both Venus and Jupiter in Cancer. A contrast with earlier, a few weeks ago, when we had Mars and Saturn both in Aries, and they had the upper position or overcoming square position. It was making the cardinal signs have a, lean towards the malefic and the negative, whereas now Mars has moved on and we have both benefics in the sign of Cancer. So that's swaying, things to do with the cardinal signs. It's swaying them towards the benefic, towards the positive. So that's something we want to highlight as well. We have a full moon coming up on Sunday in Sagittarius, really putting a spotlight on the Sagittarius area of our life. And it's a fairly positive full moon. It's, the sun's in Gemini, opposed by the moon in Sagittarius. The sun's ruled by that dignified Mercury. The moon's ruled by an exalted Jupiter. The moon is making a trine to Saturn at the same time. So there is some Saturnian, downcast or more like serious energy tied into the full moon, but overall, it's not a harsh aspect, it's a trine aspect, so potentially a little bit more constructive. And then just the fact that the luminaries' rulers are so well placed suggests that this will be a positive full moon that we also want to work with. So let's go through the rising signs and see which will be usable for the next 7 days. Let's start with sunrise and Gemini rising. This will be one of the rising signs we definitely want to make use of because it puts that Mercury in Gemini in the first house very prominently and makes it the ruler of the chart. And also it puts both malefics out of the angular houses. Cancer rising we can now use, although we do have Saturn in the 10th house, which is a negative, both benefics in the first house outweigh that somewhat. And so this is our chance to highlight the building Jupiter-Venus conjunction in that sign, although the overall condition of the chart will depend on the quality of the moon, as the moon rules Cancer. Leo rising we had been using a lot up to this point, but now that Mars is in Taurus, and especially that Mars is square Pluto, we don't want to put that in the angular 10th house, so we have to skip Leo rising, and instead we can use Virgo rising, which is ruled by the dignified Mercury, and now that Mercury would be in the 10th house from Virgo, so a very dignified and angular ascendant ruler. Libra rising we cannot use because Saturn in Aries is directly opposing what we would be doing at that time from the 7th house of Aries. Scorpio rising we don't want to use because it's ruled by Mars in detriment in the sign of Taurus in the 7th house. So Mars feels very foreign and weak and under-resourced in Taurus, and we don't want to have a grumpy Mars angular and opposing what we're doing in the 7th house. Sagittarius rising, the ruler is Jupiter in Cancer, but it's placed in a dark house, the 8th house from the ascendant, and therefore cannot very constructively guide or drive along what we're trying to do. Makes Jupiter more passive, less active, and also gives Jupiter a lot of issues to deal with in the 8th house as well that we don't want. And Capricorn and Aquarius rising are both ruled by Saturn in its full in Aries. We don't want to have a fallen malefic as our chart ruler. That is definitely a negative indication, falling into traps or pitfalls. And just generally Saturn is pretty grumpy and not well placed in Aries. So instead we'd rather use Pisces rising, which has Jupiter as the ascendant ruler and is placed in one of the best houses, the 5th house from the ascendant, the house of creativity and joy and children and all things good. So Pisces rising is really nice to use. And we don't want to use Aries or Taurus rising because either of those options would put a malefic in the 1st house, and both of them are either in full or in detriment, and so we don't want to highlight those. So let's come to our first chart, and most of our charts are going to be later in the week. Our first chart will be on the full moon, May 31st, Sunday, at around 2 a.m. in your location, and you want to adjust the chart to get around 23 degrees of Pisces rising, which will put the ascendant directly trine to the ruler, Jupiter in Cancer in the 5th house. And here in this location in Los Angeles, it's the planetary hour of Mercury, but the planetary hour of Venus or the moon, which are before and after that respectively, would also work fine. So here we have an interesting and good chart. There's an emphasis with the ascendant ruler on the 5th house, and we have both benefics there, suggesting that everything good and positive about this chart is really concentrated in that area of creativity, making art, making music, creating anything, including children, and sexuality, self-expression. It can be to do with students as well, because the 1st house is the 9th house from the 5th, so you can be a teacher of people in the 5th house. And then the full moon, we have the sun down in the 4th house in Gemini along with Mercury, and then the moon up in the 10th house, which is separating. So the full moon has just happened and then applying to a trine with Saturn. And so the energy of this chart is going to be really overflowing. It's going to be very highly charged. So do make sure that you're comfortable with a full moon energy before you use this chart. It might feel like a fully charged battery, something, just overflowing with energy. And so it can feel quite stimulating. And so in this chart, the luminaries are shining the light on the 10th and 4th houses. So there's a simultaneous, the light is shining from the sun in the 4th house of home, parents, where we come from, our ancestry, and so on. And it's being received by a fully luminized moon in the 10th house of career or public affairs, public reputation, or people who have authority over us, like bosses and so on. So the energy of this chart is, there's some energy or some focus on doing something at home, doing something to do with where you come from, that's really energizing and, shining out a light into the public sphere. So, for example, if you wanted to do like an ancestry or genetic a test around this time, and you want the results to be very visible and clear, that's one way I can think of this working. Or if you wanted to, if you've been doing a writing project at home, I've been working on it privately, and now you want to shine that light out and release it into the world, publish it, that's also where I can see this coming up. And with both benefics in the fifth house, we've got like a very, and it's, Jupiter's also ruling the moon. There's something perhaps creative, something that we have created that we're now putting out into the world. And we want to be aware that Saturn's in the second house. This is not good for finances, and Mars is in the third. So there might also be trouble with like communications, education, travel, and so on. And if you want to see the very best chart of next week, then stay tuned till the end of this video, where I've saved the very best chart until the end. So also on May 31st, Sunday, at around 5:50 a.m. in your location, you can get a Gemini rising chart. And here I've put the ascendant at 10 degrees of Gemini, which puts the sun directly on the ascendant, and it's the hour and the day of the sun in this location. So really leaning into this full moon energy here. And the ascendant ruler is Mercury, which is also placed in the first house of Gemini. So I think, this is going to be one of our last days to capture that dignified Mercury, and the moon will eventually go on to oppose Mercury by sign as well. So what this makes me think of is, if you want to start or launch a writing, speaking, or just general communication topic around this time, especially with the ruler of the third house being the sun in the first as well, or if you want to start a piece of research, launch a piece of research, do a science project, a maths or accounting project, then this will be a good time to do it, because Mercury is well placed, it's the ascendant ruler in the first, and then we have this supercharged full moon that's, co-present with Mercury, that's really supercharging its activities. And with the moon in the seventh house, you could also, be doing a writing, communication or research-based project with a partner as well. It could be you and someone else working closely together. Or this would also be a fine time to sign a contract, for example. Mercury rules written documents and is well placed. And then there's this, very strong energy between the first and seventh houses, you and the partner, and the rulers of both of those houses are well placed. And then, with both benefics in the second, this is also a fine chart for like your personal streams of income as well, suggesting that there could be like some profit or financial gain from the writing or communication or research-based project that you are doing at this time. And here we have Saturn in the 11th house. There might be some issues with with like peers or the circles that you're in. And then it's ruling the 8th and 9th. So there could be some issues with like investment, other people's money, publishing, and with Mars in the 12th. Mars in the 12th is pretty like passive. It's pretty much like deactivated in this chart, but you would want to avoid the topics that Mars rules here. Like it wouldn't be good for health or going to the doctor, for example. Our next chart is on May 31st at around 12:50 p.m. in your location in the afternoon, and you want to adjust the chart to around 12 degrees of Virgo rising. And the ruler of the chart is again Mercury, but now placed in the prominent 10th house in Gemini. And the full moon is like our first chart in the 10th, 4th axis, but now the luminaries have been flipped over. So now it's like there's a lot of energy and charge from the 10th house of your public sphere that's being shone down and received by the moon in the 4th. So something energizing from your career that's really illuminating and fortifying your foundations or home life. So, potentially like career success that is warming and supporting your ability to, have a nice place to live, be able to afford a nice place to live or something like that. So, with a dignified ascendant ruler, it's a generally good all-purpose chart, but seeing as Mercury is our planet of focus, it is again good for research, communication, writing, speeches, accounting, mathematics, and anything of that kind. But you could also use it for something that combines the 10th and 4th house topics. And, the moon in this chart is ruling the 11th with both benefics there. So something about like drawing support from peers or patrons or like social media, even social networks down into the 4th house of home. And yeah, that exalted Jupiter is ruling both the 4th house of property and home, and then also the 7th house of partnership as well. And so this chart could also be good for those areas. I wouldn't use it for anything like financial related to property, like buying or selling though, because Venus is square Saturn, it's ruling the 2nd house, and then Saturn is placed in the 8th house of taking out loans, getting loans from the bank, and things like that. And Mars is in the 9th house, so also not good for publishing. It's ruling the 3rd house as well, not good for publishing or education. But otherwise, this is a good all-purpose chart, very high energy. And now we come to our very best chart of next week, which is going to be on the 27th of May, Wednesday, in the hour of Mercury on Mercury's day. And you want to adjust the chart to get around 9 degrees of Gemini rising. And so Mercury is our chart ruler, and it's receiving, the moon is just separating from a trine to Mercury in Libra in the 5th house, and then it will go on to trine Jupiter in the 2nd house. So this is a really nice chart. This would be great, to be honest, for a Mercury like petition, making a Mercury altar, or even like a talisman, like really, really special Mercury moment. I don't love that the moon is opposite to Saturn, but I think that its aspects, the fact that it's contained by an aspect from Mercury to Jupiter, does help to shield it from that a little bit, but you might still expect some delays or restrictions from Saturn opposing the moon. But I do just love this flowing trine between the 1st and 5th houses, really strong, like creative support from the 5th house. And the moon, this is just my favorite phase of the lunar cycle, when the moon is trine to the sun and it's a waxing moon. It's full of energy and growing in light, but it's not so overwhelming as the full moon can sometimes be. And I love that it's moving from the trine to Mercury in the 1st and then bringing that energy to Jupiter in the 2nd. So it's really kind of translating and connecting the 1st and 2nd houses. So this would be great, for example, to gain financially from a writing project, gain a revenue stream from something mercurial like mathematics, accounting, research, communication, and so on. One other caveat is the moon's ruler, which is Venus. She is square to Saturn at this point, so that is another negative. But overall, I think the positives outweigh that. Mercury is so well placed. It's now visible. And that lovely aspect between Mercury and the moon is just such a good option for us to use for anything mercurial that we have planned. And like all our mutable rising charts at the moment, we're going to have like all 4 angular houses, the 1st, 10th, 7th, and 4th, ruled by either Mercury in domicile or Jupiter exalted in Cancer. And so that just gives us such a strong head start when like the 4 most important areas, the 4 most important pillars of the chart are ruled by well-placed planets. And so that speaks to whatever we initiate or launch at this time will probably go very well. And we just want to avoid the topics I mentioned with our previous Gemini rising chart. So I hope this week you have a chance to take advantage of Mercury in Gemini. Even if you don't use these electional charts, it would be great to just meditate and attune to that Mercury energy, tune into like the playful, exploratory energy of Mercury in Gemini, because it won't be until like late August or September that we get Mercury in its own sign of Virgo. And so these are the best charts of next week. If you want a shorter breakdown, you can also follow me on TikTok and Instagram, where I post there as well. And if you have something really important that you'd like a personalized election for, then you can check out my website, mirabelleturner.com, where you can book a time with me and I'll sit down and go with you go over with you the event that you want to elect, whether it's you want to publish your book, submit your thesis, throw a birthday party, put down an offer on a house. I'll sit down with you with what you want to work with, the time frame that you have, and also make sure that the election works with your birth chart personally as well. So do check that out if you're interested, and otherwise I'll see you next week with more chats. All right, see you next time.